Awesome. Thanks, Erin. So we are so excited and privileged to have our two panelists for today's discussion. Our first is Kyle Jansen, who is the director of UW Milwaukee Prototyping Center. Kyle, can you tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing at the Prototyping Center and how you work with founders on a daily basis?
Sure. First and foremost, I am a mechanical engineer converted to an entrepreneur, so I have the product development thinking first. And it's fun for me to say, we can do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and that's how you go from idea to commercialization. But you also have many avenues in between there. Don't let me tell you what's best. And then from the entrepreneurial side, I would say, well, don't do all that yet. Figure out this bite-sized chunk first, then proceed. Do that next bite-sized chunk, then proceed. So I've got a little bit of viewpoints from both angles, but at the UWM Prototyping Center, we are partners in product development, prototyping, fabrication, to take that idea, turn it into a physical, tangible product. And I say I work with things like shapes and materials, versus Matt is going to have more electrons and software, where I would make the thing and then Matt would make it move or run or interact with it. So we partner a lot with software engineers and electrical engineers when you need something smart, but we're good at that tangible object and taking it from your head and giving it to you in your hands. So hopefully that was all right.
No, that's exciting. Love that we have the balance today of both the hardware and the software. So really looking forward to today's discussion. And as you mentioned, our other awesome panelist is Matt McCoy, president and founder of Lanex. So Matt, if you can tell us a little bit of the stuff that you do at Lanex.
Sure. So I'm founder of Lanex and president. We're a 23-year-old software development company based in Heartland and known for creative solutions to business problems through custom software. So, I guess the customers that we've been successful with over the years have looked for ways to build things that are not templated and ordinary type things. So people that want to build something unique, and it was kind of fun because in 2018 we were able to found our own startup, Field to Freezer, which is a SaaS service for small independent meat processors. So we had kind of an interesting launch with all of that because we were developing our product in the midst of COVID, basically. So, it was like sort of all the initial traction and that sort of thing that we saw really changed because, a lot of people had looked at the meat processing industry as kind of a niche sort of market. And when people went out to the grocery store and couldn't find beef and, pork and things like that in the freezers, they all went to the small independent processors. So we actually had to, I don't want to say pivot, but build some features out, things like that to accommodate some additional types of animals and things. So anyway, I'm looking forward to kind of sharing some of that experience with you all. But yeah, thanks for having us here today.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. So we're just going to jump right in. And I think this is probably one of the questions that Joe and I get asked most frequently, because not all of our founders are technical founders. So when you're in that position in which you're a founder building out a technical idea, but you are not the tech person, how should a founder go about seeking and selecting external partner or consultant to build their prototype?
All right, Matt.
You want to start? All righty. Well, it's kind of interesting because I think that one of the things that we've seen that were an approach that was successful was people that really took a lot of time to know their industry and that sort of thing. So somebody I want to say that a partner that's willing to actually learn and kind of be immersed in your idea and that sort of thing. So, one of the big things that and maybe I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, is things we emphasize is discovery. So we're kind of a learning company. So our employees, they like to learn about the things that they're doing and the greater meaning of that and that sort of thing. And I think that companies need to be aware of what the best practices are, but then also from a startup perspective, be aware of what practices and approaches are appropriate for a particular project based on their budget and their goals and things. And I think a lot of times people are too, or companies can be too regimented, and they don't necessarily have a real broad base of experience across industries and things. And by having a partner that's willing to learn and understand what your business is and where it's going, and I want to say not try to break your bank and things as you're building out that initial phase, but be flexible with their approach, both methodology wise as well as budget wise is really important.
Yeah, and I'd say it's kind of like choosing someone to date in a relationship. If you think that you have to interview them, you have to say, are they a good fit for me? Not only just, do I get them personality wise? Are your energies matched? Are they going to be as passionate about this as you are? Or are you just another name with billable hours that somebody's going to pad their business with? So you need to also find out if they're in this space. If you need a piece of hardware developed, then you would certainly go to Matt. You wouldn't go to the UWM Prototyping Center, because I have nothing on my resume that shows that I could be successful. So a question is, say, give me an example of an analogous product like this that you've developed, and show me 3 or 5 or 10 of them, because they should have some experience in doing this. And it's great if they're local, absolutely. But you may find if you're creating I'm just going to say a blender, and you want to make the world's best blender, and you found a product development firm in Kansas City that makes blenders all the time, that should probably be your partner. If you came to me and said you needed a blender, I'd say, yes, I'm an expert at product development. I know that I can do it. I may have some things that I need to learn to be successful. You don't necessarily want to pay me to learn things. So you want your consultant to jump right to knowing what that solution is, to work quickly and effectively. And I tell people, first and foremost, like, this is really easy for someone who's done it before. I haven't done this, so you might want to keep looking around. Here are people that I would call. But if it's something I have some confidence in, I'm going to show you with my game plan, with my excitement, and most importantly, my budget isn't going to have the cost of all the lessons learned. So there's a factor that we put in our proposals called risk. And one of those at the very end, if I sum up all the hours and tasks that I think it's going to take to do this, and let's just say it's $50,000. If I've done this before, I know it's going to be $50,000. If I've never done this before, I might put a fudge factor of like 0.8. So all of a sudden that $50,000 becomes 90, because I know I'm going to screw up a lot. And you're going to get that proposal for $90,000 because I'm going to say, hey, that's just what it's going to take me to do it. Versus if you find the facility that's already done this before, they might give you the same thing for $50,000 because they know what they're doing. So shop around.
Can I share a graphic real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, let's see. It's probably one of those may I versus can I. So anyway, I wanted to just kind of show this. If I don't know, can everybody see this? Is it,
yeah.
Kind of a graphic here. So this is one of the challenging parts, I think, with startups. And as a founder, entrepreneur, innovator, you're kind of here in the middle of this, this circle. And it's kind of like I guess if you look at the circle as being a rubber band, you can stretch a lot of different ways, but you can only stretch so far. And you've got a lot of challenges between, doing it right. What's the right way to build a piece of hardware or to develop a piece of software? What does traction look like for you? What do you need to build in order to have people pay you money for it? Because at the end of the day, the most important question you have to answer, in your startup phase is somebody actually willing to pay you money for your product? And a lot of times you see people overbuilding and that sort of thing. They want to build the thing, as it's going to look in 5 years, and you might find yourself building features that you don't need right now, that are going to need to be changed later on, all that sort of thing, and wasting your money. And when you start looking at things like investors in equity and they investors, there's actually, we were in the Food Finance Institute's FabCap Accelerator with Field to Freezer, and one of the quotes from that, Brad Rostowski, who was our mentor there, he said, investors are good at making money. They're not necessarily good at running businesses. So, you know, you can find yourself chasing your tail and everything, doing everything an investor has, wants you to do, including building out, you know, features that may not be necessary. You know, you've got competitors, you've got, you know, different, you know, runway to consider, all of these different, you know, kind of, you know, constituents and things. And I think that having development partners that sort of understand those, you know, those polls and that sort of thing, you know, that can provide you with some guidance, you know, as a long-term partner is really important. So I just wanted to share that real quick. I'll turn this sharing off here.
Sure. No, I think that's great. And I think some really great points out of this, because I know a lot of times as founders, we think of, I'm going to build this thing technically, like, and especially I think there's that intimidation factor when you're not the technical strength, right, in the team. And so you just kind of go and you're like, well, they're technical, this is what they do. But I love the points about it's kind of dating and you're interviewing them and approaching it more from a business perspective, in the sense of like, how successful have you been at this? Is this the right fit as far as industry? Is this what you're used to building? And then I'll also like provide me some references. Let me talk to some of the companies that you've built for before, so I can see what their experience was with you, so I can understand. And I love that point, Kyle, that you made about like not paying for their learning gap kind of thing. Like, am I going to be paying for you to learn how to do this thing? Or is there somebody else that already knows all the pitfalls that I don't have to pay for?
In some cases, you will be paying for anybody to learn, even if it's your own staff of like, hey, we're going to develop this thing that's never been created before. Maybe you can find that person, and maybe they live in Kansas City, like I say, but you don't have time to interview 300 product development firms. So there will be some learning involved, and you just have to be prepared that it might not be immediate gratification of your novel technique or idea.
One of our early phases, and I'm sure it's the same with Kyle, but we call it a discovery phase, and basically that's a you know, that's really a interactive type phase where we work with customers, and you know, it could be with a startup or a mature company, and you know, in kind of delving into what they're trying to build. And lots of times with discovery, we find that our customers don't even necessarily understand their own businesses. So they might come to us with an idea and find out that you know, what one of their assumptions was in building it isn't actually correct. Or, you know, we've seen things where you know, the problem a founder thinks they're solving isn't the actual problem. So, you know, or who is the actual customer, who's actually paying the bill. Sometimes that stuff comes out, and you know, I consider discovery similar to having a blueprint for your house. So, you know, it's sort of spending the time to pick out, you know, what fabrics and finishes and floor coverings and, you know, everything else that you're going to need in your house, and also determining, you know, what the needs of the house or what your needs for the house are going to be. So if you think about an old farmhouse, you have, you know, if you've ever walked through one of those, you know, the rooms are maybe crooked, or the floors are different levels, or one part of the house is really cold and another part's warm and everything. And, you know, maybe the house was built originally as a 3-bedroom house, but then they had a couple more kids, and it's like, well, let's tack a couple more bedrooms on and things like that. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, there's a sensible way to, you know, to kind of build something so you're not overbuilding and you're not spending too much money, you know, before you need to. But you're not going to necessarily know how to construct it without spending the time to, you know, to investigate that. So, you know, discovery is something that that we'll often charge for as a, you know, as an activity. And, you know, it's basically our deliverable is very detailed scope of work documents. So, you know, like in Kyle's case, if you're building a tangible item, it's going to be a, you know, probably a diagram, or, you know, that for the actual, you know, thing being, you know, being created. But, you know, in our case, it's a lot of things like user roles. How does one user interact with another? How's security handled? You know, are there going to be online payments? How are you handling that? Are there tax considerations, you know, that you have to consider? A lot of those sorts of things. So we kind of work with people, you know, going through that. And, you know, people that, you know, and people can do their own discovery work too, really investigate, you know, who their customers are, you know, and that can be kind of fun too. I mean, you can hit the road. I drove almost, actually a little over 10,000 miles now, meeting with meat processors across the country and stuff. And you find that there's differences as far as geographies go, or, you know, age groups, all those sorts of things. And, you know, if you want a nice, you know, view, you know, trip across the country or something, sometimes it's nice to just hop in the car and, you know, get going. So I don't know, but that discovery phase, I think, is super important.
No, definitely. And that kind of leads us to our next question is, those are some great points of what you're expecting from, or what to expect and ask from the consultants that you're going to be working with. But what should you as founders be prepared to come with in order to work with you, to provide you to build a prototype? So as you said, like that discovery phase is something that if you have the budget for, great, you could work with you to go through that. But at the same time, that's something you could do ahead of time and be prepared with already those personas, understanding who your customer is, how they'll be using the tool, what are the features you're looking to build in, what is too much to come with, what is not enough to come with, what is just the right thing, like what is that balance to come to you guys as consultants to once you're ready to build that prototype.
I think I've never seen somebody come with too much information. I'll start with that.
Okay.
But I've absolutely seen the opposite end, like Matt says, where they say, I want this thing. And that's all they say. Well, I don't like the ones that are out there. What don't you like about it? And you start, and I ask systematic questions to develop a product spec. So as an engineer, I'm beaten over the head with a list of orders my whole career saying, build this thing. And it's going to do these jobs and these tasks, and it shall be this big, and it shall be this strong, and it shall look like this, and it shall perform these functions, and it shall last this long. Engineers are great at translating all those variables into a thing. Engineers are not so great at, I want a better one of these, because they'll make one that they want. And then it might disappoint you, the founder, and say, well, I wanted it this way. Well, you never said that. And then there's discrepancy and a disagreement. So unless it's in writing and you can point to it and you say it needs to weigh 68 grams and it needs to cost less than $2.80 to make. Now we have something that's black and white that, yes, I have achieved what it is we were looking for, or no, I haven't. So that product spec is always the thing. Customer discovery is trying to steer you towards at the initial phase. Customer discovery defines the problem. The solution to that problem is what that product specification should be. And like Matt says, you can pay me to do customer discovery, but you shouldn't. As the founders, you should be in the car driving, because you're going to see insights that I'm not going to pick up because I'm getting paid hourly. Not that that has anything to do with it, but that I don't live and die and rest my hat on whether or not this succeeds. And I'm not looking for every little hint of a suggestion of some thing in this industry that gives me the advantage that I hear over and over again, because I'm not an expert and I'm not as passionate as you, the founder. And I say to people all the time, don't pay me for something that you can and should be doing unless you have way too much money and you're just bored and you don't want to do the work because you're lazy. I have yet to ever meet a founder that had too much money and was lazy. It's quite the opposite. So I say, here's all the things that you can and should do. Come back and I will coach you through making a product spec so we can sit down and then get to work.
I think it's kind of funny too, like for discovery, you know, sometimes if we're a little bit more maybe introverted or something, it's difficult to get out and talk with people and that sort of thing. It's like, well, what if they don't like my idea, or, you know, that sort of thing. And it's like, well, you know, you got to hear it. You got to hear the good and the bad, you know, with your idea. And when I started, you know, kind of my discovery journey, you know, our field to freezer idea was based off of a, you know, basically a discussion from an up north hunting trip about 8 years ago or something. And I thought, well, why is it every time you drop an animal off at a processor, it's it's a pain. It takes half an hour wait in line. The processors they're writing everything down on a pad of paper and a pen. You don't see anything electronic, all this sort of thing. So my assumption, and this is incorrect, I mean, not universally incorrect, but largely incorrect, was the processors were cheap, because everybody should have some sort of computer, to enter their orders on. Well, it turns out that the reason that nobody had it is because the thing didn't exist. So then I'm like, oh, well, that's a different story then. And, let's take some of our knowledge from working with other industries and apply it into meat processing and that sort of thing. But, we didn't really start building our product for almost a year after we had started our discovery sessions. And as I went out and met with processors and things, not having anything to show people was a little bit weird. So we had actually developed graphical, they're called comprehensive designs or design comps of what the whole application would look like. And basically we found people that would buy into our concept, essentially based off of an idea and some wireframes and things, which was a really good approach, because we wouldn't have been where we needed to be, having built the software, and we wouldn't have had the right feedback from those those processors and things. So you can be somewhat unconventional, as you're going out and meeting with people. There's tools for prototyping that are great, for software. There's a product called Adobe XD, which will allow you to kind of mock up an application, give you kind of the look and feel of your application without actually building out all the functionality. So, you might spend some money, and time building out your designs and your branding and things like that, and put something together in XD, which you can go out and talk with people and use it as kind of a straw man for whether what you're going to be building is on target or not. And that's a great way to do it, because you want all those changes, to be identified up front. And, and I know this slide is going to apply to Kyle's stuff as well, but the cost of changes. So, if you're making a change down here, you identify, hopefully everybody can see that, you identify a change on the, at the beginning of a project, it's going to be lower cost and that sort of thing. What you don't want to be doing is making changes way into your product development, because with software, things get really messy. So, say there's a new user audience or something like that you've got to go and accommodate. Now you've got all these problems where you've got to rework code and all of that stuff, and then it can introduce bugs and other sorts of things. So you want to spend that time in discovery to really understand, who you're working with. And I'm sure, in Kyle's case, if you're actually building a tangible thing and you discover that you need to make a change to it later on, I mean, software can be costly potentially, in people's time and that sort of thing. But if you're building something tangible and suddenly you have to break it because it doesn't do what it's supposed to, I mean, Kyle could speak to that stuff better than I can, but it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, the principles are the same. I don't want to take up any more time, but I have that same exact diagram in my slides. So perfect thing to show.
Well, Matt and Kyle, I'm curious, because we're kind of talking about preparation, and I love that you're really leaning into the customer discovery aspect, right? I think 4M does a phenomenal job of talking through the importance of customer discovery. But as founders are thinking through, probably the biggest question, and I'm sure the founders on this call can validate this, is, am I ready to engage with a consultant, right? And you kind of mentioned this interview back and forth, right? Of the questions that they'll ask you and the questions that you'll inevitably ask them. I'm curious, if a founder were to sit across from you and say something, and it instantly made you go, you're not ready to work with an external partner, what do you think that would be? Or what are some examples of things that might indicate to you that a founder isn't quite at that stage yet?
My favorite single question is I say, okay, pretend I have this thing that you're asking for. Here it is. Pretend, like, hold out your hands, and I have them hold out their hands. And I put this imaginary thing in their hands. And I say, now what are you going to do? And if they pause, they're not ready. If they say, I'm going to run this over to my patent attorney, I'm going to show this to my investor, I'm pitching, I'm practicing on Shark Tank, I'm going on Project Pitch It, my investors are ready, my neighbors are ready, I have 10 customers, like, if they're quiet, they're not ready. But if they give me the laundry list of things they're going to do, then I will give them a quote because they're ready. But that single question, I think, is my favorite one to ask.
Mhm. I think, I mean, that's an excellent answer, and I would agree with Kyle. I mean, you know, a lot of times we've probably worked with over 40 startups or so since founding Lanex, and our I would say our most successful startup was actually eventually acquired by, I think they're like hovering around a Fortune 20 company or so. But to explain it in in simple terms, it was essentially a meal configurator for cancer patients. So it's a pretty involved project and that sort of thing, but really kind of a cool thing. But they had a pretty good idea of who they were going to be, you know, approaching as their customers. They were actually founded by a number of cancer survivors, so they understood the need for it, you know, the approach and all that sort of thing. And I think what the things that I've seen that have not been successful have been founders that won't adapt to new information with respect to their ideas and things. So there was one we were working with, I don't know, this was maybe 10 years ago or so, but had a real interesting idea for I'll just say fundraising for nonprofit organizations. And it was kind of a neat thing. And you know, basically they had set aside a budget for development, but as we got into the process and everything, turned out they had some very kind of complex concepts with how money was being handled and that sort of thing. And it took too long to explain to people that might be interested in their product what the thing actually does or how you actually do it. And we had suggested some fairly simple, you know, modifications that, you know, might have been a few $1,000s of work or something. And it would have changed the whole nature of that, you know, of that project, you know, and I think the outcome of it. But, you know, they kind of had it in their mind, it needed to work this particular way and that sort of thing. So I think you really need to be, you know, flexible with your approach, and kind of, as, you know, like the diagram I had earlier, you're sort of in the middle and you've got all these different, you know, constituents and, you know, elements for traction and all this kind of thing. And I think it's really kind of a walk of faith, honestly, for a lot of your, you know, a lot of getting going with stuff. You got to have faith in your idea, you know, maybe faith up above just to keep you sane and all that sort of thing. And you know, but I would say that you really have to have some idea that there's a need for your product, because, you know, kind of like I was saying before, you know, the big question you got to answer is somebody willing to pay money for your product. And if you've got no idea, then, I mean, you might have fun building it, but you're kind of, you know, wasting your money, honestly.
So a quick question for you guys on kind of budgeting and scoping, right? Kyle, I've mentioned that, or I heard that you threw out a couple numbers, and Matt, you know, you've talked a little bit about the discovery process into a statement of work document, those sorts of things. Do you recommend, when working with startups, that they sort of take an MVP approach in working with you, right? Instead of trying to build out like everything under the sun and hand it off to an external party. Maybe we're kind of talking about prototyping a little bit, but how do you recommend founders don't bite off more than they can chew in working with an external partner?
You want to take that, Kyle?
Yeah, unless it's been done before, like I'm modifying a shovel, I'm modifying this, But if it's a brand new technology and you don't know that if there's a market for it even, or that if your solution actually addresses the problem, don't spend the $500,000 that it takes to develop something. Spend $5,000 to answer that question. And it always just stems back to customer discovery. And that's where your MVP, and I challenge people, because I was taught this, like, what can you do today to prove, to Matt's point, that someone will give you money? If you're not embarrassed by your first prototype to show it to someone, you've waited too long. You spent too much money. So what can you do today to prove that someone will take a $20 bill out of their pocket and hand it to you in exchange for that good? And you don't need a $500,000 development plan to answer that question. There's you kick off the $500,000 development plan after people go crazy for that MVP.
It's actually along those same lines. When we were in Generator, or G-Beta's Generator program with Field to Freezer, Molly Dill from there had this, expression, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And I mean, it sounds a little bit funny, and, I sort of have this, dichotomy that I live in between a mature software company and a startup, and doing things the right way, and then doing things to get things done so that you can get more information about how you're building things out. But one of the approaches that they had been advocates for is, for example, if you have let's say a search tool or something, and there's a lot of people that have ideas for some kind of search tool or something connecting people or that sort of a thing, in some different fashion. Maybe you don't want to spend the money building out the search tool fully, but you want to have a process in place where if you get an email or an inquiry, you can actually do that work yourself manually and then give somebody the results in a timely fashion. So, and let's just say it's something that's for a fee or whatever. If you can kind of do that process manually, you've got a pretty good idea that somebody's going to be willing to pay you money to do it. So if you have a software product that's going to approximate that or walk somebody through that user flow, it's not a complete shot in the dark, that what you're building is going to be something that people are interested in buying. And I think that's a great approach. And the other thing is, with MVPs, I think it's challenging. You got to make sure that the MVP, I want to say, isn't a complete piece of crap from like a user interface or user experience sort of thing, because we've all been on websites where we're like, this is junk and I'm not going through this thing. And you want to make sure that if you have people rejecting your idea, your product, that they're rejecting it for the right reason. So you don't want them rejecting it because your user interface stinks and it's too difficult to use and that sort of a thing. You want to know that, if they don't like it, you want to understand that, you want to understand the nature for them not liking it and that sort of thing. So we have a startup we're just starting working with now. And we had an option for building out kind of a simple WordPress site that would approximate some of the features for the finished application. And we do a lot of WordPress stuff for like marketing sites and things like that, but it's a little bit more difficult when you start building out a software application. And my concern with when we looked at what they were looking at doing for an MVP was that the user experience wasn't going to be very good. And then you spend all this time on, addressing all that, or, really piecing something together when they could have just started from scratch and built an MVP as a custom application, and taken it to a particular point and then, had some real good feedback. So, anyway, I'm rambling.
That's great. I mean, and it's great to kind of share those personal experiences too. That's what kind of grounds all this. Maggie, I got one more question for the crew, and then I'll pass it back off to you. So thanks for letting me jump in.
No worries.
So I'm curious, because we're talking a little bit about professional services. We're talking about product development, right? We're talking about kind of that interplay between, founder with a vision and then sort of an execution team. And it's something that I felt kind of personally in working with other professional services, specifically lawyers, is that it's tough to know when you can reach out to them and what you're going to be charged for, right? Sometimes you don't want to, send an email because you're wondering if that's going to have a cost attached to it, right? That kind of thing. If a founder is curious about, working with you or a group like yours, right? When should they really start to expect where money enters the equation versus just trading ideas and kind of being collaborative? And then once money or budget does enter the equation, how do they really get the best sort of bang for their buck and really collaborate with you versus, making it feel like they're just either telling you what to do or feeling like they're being swept up and they're along for the ride and not in control? Harder. When can they reach out without
sure.
$1?
I mean, one of my core values, I guess, on a personal level is mentoring. And I appreciate the fact that a lot of people have taken time, with me over the years and things. And I'm 52 now and started programming when I was 12 and had a lot of help along the way and that sort of thing. And I like being available for people and that sort of thing. And, I don't mind fielding questions and that sort of thing. In fact, I mean, our process, if we were going to get into an engagement or something, we spend a little bit of upfront time just kind of figuring out, what somebody's trying to do and all of that sort of thing. We've got, let's see, a number of startups we're working with right now with, we've done, some little discovery projects, but I mean, sometimes, we can spend 3 or 4 hours on something and say, this is kind of what, this is how big a, pie you're looking at and that sort of thing. And, is it realistic? Is it something you can accomplish, with your own money? You're going to need to raise money, that sort of thing. I mean, one of the interesting things too is we've offered as well to take equity positions in companies if they have good ideas and that sort of thing. So we might build, some portion of the software, for equity, that sort of thing. So, I'm always interested in, hearing ideas and, mentoring and that sort of thing. But, we've got a lot of flexibility with how we handle things. So I would just, to answer the question directly, I would say, feel free to reach out and, I don't mind, I don't mind answering questions and, we just hope people are, respectful of everyone's time and that kind of thing. So, and we'll try to, at least for myself, I try to get back to people in a timely fashion, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, I always say the least favorite part of my job is when I have to charge someone, because like Matt, I'm empathetic. I want to help you. I want to do so much for you, but I can't have a line out the door of people that I am working for free, because then I would never get to go home. But in terms of, Aaron, you asked a question, and to me, there's two answers to that. One is before a project starts, and one is after a project starts. So before a project starts, kind of like Matt's saying, I'm just trying to figure out how big of a journey this will be from idea to commercialization. Have you done your regulatory homework? Have you done the legal homework? Have you done your patent search? How much customer competition have you done, to kind of gauge how much the founder has done, knowing that, okay, they've done this, check that box, okay, they've done all this work, so we're not going to have to incorporate that into a quote. They literally just want us to execute this product spec. So a lot of that is just probing. Okay, we went on Google Patents and I didn't find a single thing in this space. You're probably safe. Or, oh my goodness, I went on Google Patents and I found 150 entries. Before you get started with me, go ahead and meet with go ahead and meet with a patent attorney and make sure that you can operate in this space. But little things like that should be checked off. And that's all kind of free. And obviously I'll send you a quote and you'll know that before we get started. Okay, I'm gonna have to start billing you from here on out to do project work. But like Matt says, advice is free, mentoring is free. Yes, we do that. My favorite thing is when, you give me the product spec and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, by the way, we want to do an endurance test to have it last 100,000 cycles. I've gotten good at this sentence as the annoying consultant that I am. Great, we can do that. Let me create the product scope change document that will show you the budgetary increase and timeline duration that we're going to need to execute this request because it's above and beyond what is granted in the proposal and quote we provided. I hate saying that, but I have to say that, otherwise we would never finish any project. So it's the more clarity and granularity I can put in my quotes and proposals, the greater the expectations are, so that I don't give you this thing and say, hey, did you cycle test it to 100,000 cycles? No, I didn't know I needed to do that. Had I known, I could have incorporated that, and I would have incorporated that, and I probably would have changed the stress limits on the part to last 100,000 cycles. Again, that change at the end where it's like, guys, and that's what sucks about being a consultant, if I can be vulgar saying that word, sorry. Of like, everybody assumes everybody knows everything, and unless you tell me that, like, I didn't know that, like, dang it, now it's start over even. So, but yeah, it all comes through with communication always, being upfront always. And like Matt says, sometimes, especially for startups, you're just like, all right, I'm not billing you, like, let's meet for a coffee, let's talk, let's see where you're at. Don't worry about the money. Let's get this right. Let's get it done.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. We have a startup. We just got approval on their project, but they had interviewed 39 different development companies, and they're actually out of state. And I was pretty surprised. I'm like, obviously, I think we're a pretty special company, but I was like, my gosh, for somebody to have that much time to, to do that. But, they really liked our approach. And, around here, and you've probably heard this expression, we don't know what we don't know. So a lot of times, getting into a development or, engineering kind of phase, you may not know it, and we don't necessarily know it either. But, when you get that, that experience and everything, having done it for a while and with lots of businesses, that does make things a lot easier. But, definitely all with an eye toward, keeping your costs down and making sure that you're not over engineering and, a lot of those kind of things.
Yep.
All right, we've got one more question we'll sneak in, and then I want to give the audience some time to ask any questions that they may have. So I think one of the things that we want to know from like the technical side, like I know for us at my job, like we like scope creep, and you're working on an agile cycle, so you're doing sprints, and so meaning everything is done at a very bite-sized section, so that you can always you test, you sign off, you build, so you're just building on top of. So from a non-technical perspective, how should a founder expect that collaborative prototyping process to go? Once you've signed off and you've agreed on what the specifications are, and now it's you as a consultant are taking it to build a thing, what should me as a founder expect to see, to hear? Like, what should our process and communication look like from that point on?
For us, we basically work in a series of sprints. So a lot of times our discovery process, it's generally like a 4 to 6 week sort of thing, and we'll be doing at least weekly meetings, unless and those are often remote, particularly these days, but not always. But we will kind of start digging into the project, increasingly deeper, as the time goes on, and as we start to get further definition of things, we'll start playing things back to you. So we typically say that a discovery project is going to be conducted in a way that the deliverables will be sufficient to identify what we're being asked to do, and that a different development company could do it as well. So we don't assume that we're going to be doing the development work. Obviously, we'd like to, and that sort of thing. But people can take the product of the discovery session somewhere else and things. But those discovery deliverables are always going to include for us a scope of work. So like a specification, a spreadsheet indicating breakdown of hours for the different components. Will generally include, they're called ERDs, but they're kind of like design documents for how a database might be structured. Could be a data model, could be wireframes, or even style guides, things like that. Occasionally we'll do some of the branding and marketing things as part of it. But you know, those products are actually, you know, we look at them as very usable, you know, either for the eventual development, or if you're going out for investors and things like that, you can kind of show a roadmap and that kind of thing. So lots of times, you know, at the end of a discovery process, we'll, you know, we might say this is a good, you know, phase 1 block of things to look at building, and then, you know, this might be a logical phase 2 and that sort of thing. So, you know, but it's a very interactive process. It's not like we disappear for 6 weeks and, you know, and say, here you go at the end of it. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, really enjoy that time, and, you know, they learn something about what they're trying to do in the process as well.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what you just said. Is you don't just, okay, shut the doors, I'll come back to you in 6 weeks. As the founder, you're integrated in this. As smart as my brain is to develop and design something, I don't know anything about the space unless you tell me, or unless I go do that customer discovery, or unless I have some test that I need to pass in front of me. So there's a lot of back and forth. And for every idea that I've ever been told, maybe not ever, I have 10 ways of doing that. And so I need to sift through and tell you, okay, we could have a really good expensive one that's going to take longer to develop that people are going to love, or we can do it really cheap, fast, and easy, but it's going to be missing these components. Mm-hmm. So I do something called basically a concept matrix, where I'll take my brain and I'll tell you all the different ways of doing this, and we'll sift through and we'll say, okay, here's these ways. Now we're going to rate these, and they're going to get a score. And based on that score, we're going to look at them a little bit differently. And then maybe we'll pick these two to merge together and move forward with. And it's a very collaborative effort. And I always say, I'm just on your team. Yes, I'm a paid consultant, but my success is your success. I need this thing to work so that you tell your friends that I did a good job, and they come back to me and I get to continue doing my job, which I love to do. So I want to succeed. And that takes the two of us working together in great stride by stride communication of, hey, I had this advancement. Like you say, Matt, checking in every so often, but also like, hey, I'm at this point, I need some things answered. Let's meet and go through these, make some decisions, and move forward.
Mm-hmm. With that, like, do you at the end, because I think one of the things that we see, and we've all seen this, is that somebody will engage a consultant or a team, or even like a developer, solo developer, to work on something. And then once they hand it over, maintaining that could be a nightmare if you have not the documentation or the understanding of what they built and why they built it that way. So is that something that you also provide as part of your end product, is some sort of documentation?
Yeah, it's funny. That's actually something on one of my slides I created. But basically, documentation, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of documentation. You can have documentation built into your code by having good commenting structure, and a developer can go into it and say, I know what they're doing here because they've commented their code very well. Other times it's, you know, I'm going to create a reference manual. It's kind of, think about the, like you need a router for your house, a wireless router or something. You've got the, you know, the quick guide for setting up in 3 minutes sort of thing. And then you've got the book that nobody ever reads. Well, lots of times, you know, we'll say, you know, we're going to build you some cheat sheets, and these cheat sheets are going to be used for, you know, help, you know, on the front end of the application. So, you know, they could be tool tips, or they could be FAQs, or they could be something that's kind of in line, you know, within the application, you know, versus the reference manual that nobody's ever going to read. So, I mean, I think a lot of it, you know, with code and transition and things, and I'll just kind of toss this out there too. Make sure you have agreements in place too for with respect to intellectual property and rights and things like that when you're working with a development company, so that, you own your software and there's no ambiguity about that, but also where your software is kept, and there's a system in place for managing. It's called source control or version control. So basically any little change that's made to the code, it's documented somewhere, and there's a central repository where that's all kept, because lots of times people developer, I mean, we've seen companies go out of business, and then somebody is their, hopefully they have actual source code and there's essentially no documentation. They're like, well, here it is, figure it out, sort of thing. And obviously that can get expensive. We've had developers get fired. I mean, there was a developer with a drug problem, and we were called in to basically take over a project while they were getting fired in the other room. So we were pulling source code off of a server while they were getting fired. So we've seen some crazy stuff. So, make sure you know where your code is, that you've got the rights to it, and even if you don't read code, you want to know it's in GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that. But that's a really really important thing.
All right, so we are actually a couple minutes over. So do we have any questions from anyone that we could ask these guys real quick while we have them, if they'll give us a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Any questions from anyone? All right.
Can I mention one other thing?
Go
for your development too, and Kyle mentioned this, as far as like regulations go and that sort of thing. From a software perspective, there are regulations as well that you need to consider. And this is another thing, not to, beat a dead horse with respect to discovery, but there's, privacy policies, cookie policies, terms of use. There's regulations called COPPA, which handles how transactions are made with minors, or HIPAA for healthcare, which everybody knows about. But lots of times there can be regulations and things that may affect how your platform or package is going to be built as well. So make sure you have some understanding if you're in in an industry that might be regulated, that there could be some challenges there, and make sure you seek, appropriate, input from a professional, it could be an accountant for taxes, an attorney for, privacy policies and all that kind of thing. Because a lot of that, can dictate, what type of data you're capturing and what you're doing with it, and even how you use it in the future too.
All right, well, thank you. This has been fantastic. I've learned tons of stuff. So I hope everyone else has. And again, a huge thank you to both Kyle and Matt for their time and their expertise.